Got this recording. I'm going to get started. And I'm going to start by just, first of all, just starting with kind of where we are, what we're doing. Really the next steps. The primary thing is our third hearing, which has to do with the conditional use permit for U.S. Farmers Biofuel Facility in West Louisville. And so the main thing we're going to do today is just highlight a couple key points about that, highlight a couple points from the most recent hearing, the Stapleton Ridge, that can maybe help illuminate, some techniques that work well, some things that maybe don't work quite as well, so that you can kind of be thinking about that. And then mostly just break into our teams and talk about, kind of get prepared for that hearing and so forth. At some point, I'm going to record some lectures. I think probably aim for a whole series of briefer snippets of lectures. And the first set has to do with legal issues regarding discrimination in land use. And I'm going to just kind of work through some of the key law that's on point, talk a little bit about different types of discrimination in land use and what that looks like, and then hit sort of the key legal points. But you're seeing some of this in these simulations that we're doing, so I'm not going to try to spend too much time on that. But I certainly want everybody just to be familiar with some of those legal points. And then the other has to do with environmental justice and land use, and this third proposal, this third hearing deals a lot with environmental justice issues, and so I'm going to give that lecture. There's a fairly sizable Planning Advisory Service report. It's really a book that I wrote that is on Blackboard. So the only two things that are still on Blackboard for sort of assigned reading is the Starkville case. It's the Mississippi case having to do with an Islamic center and sort of discrimination on the basis of religion. And then this what's called Fair and Healthy Land Use, which is this environmental justice and land use book or report that I published a few years ago with the American Planning Association. It's actually part of the recommended reading for the AICP exam. So I do, just encourage you to take a look at it. There will be some very useful techniques and tools in there for the teams for this next hearing. So you do want to take a look at. And even though it is it's sizable, it's full of a lot of graphics, a lot of pictures, charts, tables, little pull-out case studies, that kind of thing. So it's not a long, tedious read. And there's a lot of emphasis on sort of planning principles, about planning procedures, and about various kinds of tools that can be used. So anyway, so that's what's sort of substantively what's there. Obviously, the third hearing is it's a third of the grade. It's significant, and I hope that sort of despite what's going on with sort of pass fail, that everybody will do your best, be professionals, and give yourself the best sort of training and education for the future that you can by giving this a real a high quality effort and so forth. But by the third hearing, all this is really familiar. And so it becomes, in many ways, a lot easier. And obviously, the most challenging thing about this last hearing was just the fact that it all had to be converted online. Like I said, I thought y'all did an excellent job with the online aspects. Yes, the technology wasn't perfect for everybody all the time, but that's kind of pretty normal with this type of stuff. And I thought it worked really well. I did want to sort of reiterate a point, which is that I thought one of the very best things that all three teams did had to do with really diving into the environmental impacts of the proposed development and looking at various sorts of creative ways to analyze those and or address it, modify the proposed development in different ways. So the Stapleton Ridge, the development team, I thought did an excellent job of redesigning and actually looked very professional. I thought the community groups did a really good job of identifying things that they wanted to see changed about the project, and also articulating what specifically in terms of very sort of concrete issues and evidence, what still bothered them about the project, or what they liked about the project, what it actually did for the community, their neighborhood, the environment, and so forth. And then the Metro team, I thought, really got into both in terms of the staff report and presentation and the questions from the commissioners. You got into, again, very specific kinds of issues connecting standards to facts in your questions or in your exploration of alternatives, and also in the conditions. So I thought all of that worked really well. And so I'd encourage you to think about that. Don't just sort of settle for whatever was presented in the real world at the time, but make it better. The one thing I did want to circle back to, which we talked about at the end of the hearing, but everybody was exhausted, and so I just want to sort of reiterate it, because this has sort of been a theme, and it's an important part of the course. But I thought that for the Planning Commission, while the deliberations were really good and the conditions were well articulated and very tailored to the specific impacts that you were trying to avoid, minimize, or mitigate, that there weren't actually findings of fact articulated. And so I just wanted to sort of go back through that and sort of explain why that's important and why I think the reality is, when there's so much, it's very complex. There's a lot you're doing in this hearing. There's a lot of issues. And so I think one of the things that happens is, by the end, especially when it runs over time and so forth, you're exhausted, and it sometimes can be easy to miss doing this. And especially since in the first hearing, findings were made, but there were no conditions of approval that were adopted expressly. And so now you guys sort of compensated for that by really going into the conditions, but then not making the findings. And you're like, okay, but that seems like, wow, that's a lot to do at a hearing, and that's very tedious. And, it doesn't always happen. You see actual examples in the real world, and they're not going through this. Well, why? Why is that? Well, first of all, there are plenty of development projects and proposals that are not contested. They're not controversial. And so if the Planning Commission doesn't ever make any findings of fact, nobody cares. There's nobody going to police that in any way. In contrast, this was a highly controversial project. There were in your hearing, there were both environmental and neighborhood groups who were either opposed to the project or certainly opposed to it. Under some of the ways in which the project was going to be developed. And so they could very easily bring a lawsuit against Louisville Metro. And especially in Kentucky, where the judges tend to be a little bit more sticklers about procedure, the court might very easily vacate the Planning Commission's approval and remand it back to Louisville Metro to redo it the right way and to make findings of fact. So that's one of the problems. Obviously, it's just not an issue if it's not contested. The second way that planning commissions get by without expressly articulating their findings is if their decision matches the staff report and the analysis of why the project meets the standards or fails to meet the standards in the staff report. So so basically what happens then is the record shows, in essence, that the Planning Commission adopted the findings analysis of the staff report. I mean, it's not really like the staff are doing the findings, but they're really sort of become a something that's put out there that the Planning Commission is deemed to have adopted, in essence. In this case, there was a conflict between the staff report, which basically said that the project was inappropriate because it involved development in the floodplain, and the standards for the Floyd's Fork overlay zone clearly prohibit development in the floodplain, sort of absolutely. And but instead, what happened is the Planning Commission adopted, went ahead and approved the proposal, but with a variety of conditions. Both analyses are totally appropriate, right? I mean, in many ways, what you're doing is you're making a judgment about A, what do the standards mean, and B, given the evidence, how do they apply to this particular project? So the staff approach was valid, and the Planning Commission's approach was valid. The only problem is that because they didn't match, it's unclear to a court, to third parties, exactly why it was that the Planning Commission did what it did. And then the third thing is the deliberations themselves can be used as evidence of the Planning Commission's findings, because so if they've talked about all of the various standards and the evidence, even if they fail to expressly articulate findings, the record might be read to in such a way as to say, well, what they said in their deliberations count as their findings. You have to be, from a legal standpoint, you have to be a little bit flexible and liberal with what counts as findings, but it happens all the time in the real world, and especially if a court is reluctant to overturn what a planning commission did, and if it looks like they're pretty good deliberations. I mean, basically what the court's looking for are the reasonings and the ways in which the evidence is connected to the standards. So again, that's quite possible, and there were great deliberations, but the problem is, in this particular case, despite the very good deliberations, they were actually kind of a little bit mixed. There was a lot of articulation of concerns about allowing any development in the floodplain, and then yet the development was approved. So again, it was it would be so much more helpful if you could express very precisely why that is. Is it that the standards are in the Floyd's Fork overlay zone are really guidelines as opposed to requirements? That was one viewpoint that was articulated. Or was it that raising the level of the soil in the development area basically took it out of the floodplain, and so therefore is no longer floodplain? Was it that the development was mitigated by various measures to address and retain runoff and to basically protect the hydrological features of the floodplain, even though you were developing in it. So sort of more of a function or purpose sort of thing. It was just sort of unclear exactly what was the basis. So that's why I really want to encourage you when you go through putting together a motion. So you've got the motion, you've got the, what it is that you want to do, to approve or deny, and, then you also want the findings that follow the standards, and then you want the conditions. And so if you're adopting the staff conditions, you need to say so. If you're adding to them or modifying or taking some out, you need to say so. And that can then be very lengthy. That can take quite a while to kind of go through all that. The other thing that really needs to happen when that's going on is the staff need to help. So the county attorney, the case manager can help to articulate some of that or help suggest some language for the commissioners as they sort of struggle through that, work through that. And the other thing is you all should help each other. So the commissioner should, if something's missing, you can step in and say, hey, well, there's this other standard here that also needs to be addressed. And, I think that the project clearly meets the standard for the following reason, and so forth. So that's the gist of the kind of being sure that you're incorporating findings. And once again, the reason is because you're making an administrative or quasi-adjudicative decision that requires that you connect the evidence on the record to the standards to show how they've been met or not met, that then support the decision you're making. So, questions or commentary on any of that? Anybody? Yeah, Kirk.
I just have a question about how to more explicitly make the findings. I totally understand everything you said about our deliberation. We had some, I guess, like you said, our issue, we had kind of mixed messages in our deliberation. Like we were stating findings of fact in a way, but they kind of went both directions. So are you saying when you make a motion, the findings of fact, formally should come after the motion?
Yeah. I mean, that's the safest one. What I'm saying is it's not always going to be the case that if you fail to make them in the formal way, that somebody's going to come and smack the city or the planning commission for doing so. But the best practice, or the A+ kind of way to do it, is to make the motion, then expressly state standard by standard the findings that support the decision, which could be to grant or deny. Actually, deny is easier, because if there's any one element of the standards that has the requirements for approval that haven't been met, then you have to deny the thing. One of the things, though, is that you probably want to go through them all just in case there's litigation. It's clear exactly what was the basis, that the applicant has met standards 1, 3, and 5 for the following reasons, but has failed to meet standards 2 and 4 for the following reasons. And and then you have to go into the conditions. What are going to be the basis of the conditions? Here, there was a lot more sort of modification of the conditions it was all very good, and it was very appropriate. But sometimes, that's an area that where the commissioners just say, and incorporating all of the conditions of approval as binding elements as proposed by the staff in the staff report. So sometimes that can be very simple and easy. It's just when you have multiple standards, a bunch of evidence, and a bunch of conditions that are being modified, then it can be quite long and tedious to go through all that. Again, the staff, you, as attorney, or the case manager can speak up and say, well, what I heard the commission saying was this, this, and this. Is this what you are articulating as your findings? And the commission then can say yes. And then that's all that's needed. Then it's on the record that that's what the basis is. So, there's lots of different ways to get it into the record. But yeah, the main problem with this one is that the deliberations by themselves didn't provide clear basis for what was the for the decision by the commission, because it was mixed.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and it's unfortunate that sometimes it can be very formal and tedious, but it's better to have a clear record. Other thoughts? Okay, so I'm going to alert you as we get into the last hearing that you also have to make separate motions permit by permit. So everything that needs an approval and it's going to perhaps have its own standards, you're going to have to do that. So that happened very well. It was done very well in the first hearing. This last one, you just had one approval, so it didn't matter. I mean, and the approval had to meet two parts of the land development code. One had to do with subdivisions and conservation subdivisions and the relationship between those standards, and the other had to do with the Floyd's Fork overlay zone. And so there were both parts of it, but it was just one approval. This next one, you're going to have to explore. Whether this is one approval or not sort of depends on exactly what the applicant ends up doing in the long run, what they choose to do with the project or not. So you just need to pay attention to that. But there actually are a couple of different sources of standards. Even if it's just one approval for conditional use permit, there's actually a couple of different sources of standards in this particular case that you have to pay attention to. So I just want to kind of alert you to that. That's U.S. Farmers Biofuel hearing number 3. Other questions?
Not good.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, so what I've done so far, I went through and graded the last week's hearing and all of the reflection papers, which were, again, excellent. I love your reflection papers in this class. You guys are amazing. And so I did not put all this in I used the grading rubric, but I didn't actually take the time to formally prepare the write-up. It's because I gave you guys lots of feedback at the time orally, and so I basically kind of did this quickly, in part because I've been kind of frantically dealing with this sort of movement to really beef up the summer schedule. This is coming university-wide from the top, from the president and provost of the university. They really want to. They're basically reducing the tuition rate this summer by quite a bit, and they're in order to make this possible for students to take classes this summer. They're going to be all online classes, but you can take classes at a cheaper rate than you would during the regular academic year, and the discount for out-of-state students is huge, and then also the idea is that we're going to have these these quite the number of online courses that will allow you to meet graduation requirements and get credits. And so all this is being developed very fast. I'm the associate dean for curriculum and scheduling. And so I meet with and talk with the dean and other administrators like multiple times a day. So the bottom line is, when we do our breakout sessions, I will share, with each group, your group grade, and so forth. Everybody, everybody on your reflection papers, we're all, once again, A+, 20 out of 20. All of them. I loved every one of them. So it was again, great job. The general, and let me finish this really just a second, Shelby, and then I'll just say generally. So where we are at the end of the of 2 hearings, so 2/3 of the way through the course, everybody in the class, 35 students in the class have A grades going into the 3rd hearing. There are 2 C+ grades. They are both with students who didn't turn in one of the reflection papers, so they know that, and that's not any big surprise and so forth. But doing fine and so forth. So that's not So that's kind of where we are going in. Shelby.
Yeah, I just had a real quick question about thing. So with any of the summer classes, will those fall under that mandatory pass-fail, or are those going to be actually graded for GPA classes?
Okay, so the plan is at this point is to grade them, because this is not. You're choosing to do it or not. If you want to take classes in the summer, you can take them or not. And there's no sudden change, right? I mean, they're going to be taught online, designed to be taught online from the very outset. Hopefully, I know people have various circumstances. But hopefully, if your circumstances are such that online courses aren't really going to work for you for the summer, then don't take one. And then if they do, at least so far, the law faculty have applied the pass-fail only to this spring, and I don't see it being applied to the summer. And in fact, I know because we talked about grades people get in the summer, would they be re-ranked at the start of the fall semester? And the answer is no. We actually never re-rank people on the basis of summer grades. That's just so that's not going to happen. Anyway, that's the gist.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Other questions? So I hope that those of you who are not graduating, both law students, planning students, other graduate students, I hope you give some thought to the adaptive planning and resilience course, because it's going to be, we're going to get into how to make planning processes more resilient and how to and more adaptive, how to make the planning process more adaptive, using some of these principles. It's going to be it's going to be online, and you're going to listen to the lectures and whatnot. But it's going to be project oriented, that you do on your own and get feedback from me, and we can meet one-on-one on the internet and whatnot. It's been it was very successful as a continuing education program, and led to a number of planning processes around the country and around the world getting redesigned to be more adaptive. So it's a good tool set to have, and it's 4 weeks from mid-July to mid-August. So just kind of pitch that out there. And like I said, the rate is really good right now. So if you are interested, I'd encourage you to sign up. I don't know when the Department of Urban and Public Affairs is going to get the sections in Plan and UPA up on the summer schedule, but they're supposed to. It'll be like a special topics course, and so but I know they're working on it. Questions?
Repeat what you just said about the planning. My audio connection cut out.
About the whole class, or just the last part, or
The very last bit you were talking about, it has yet to be determined about planning, and then you cut out.
okay, just that it's that they're working on getting it on the summer schedule. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's going to be a special topics course, and so it should be on the law school summer schedule within the next couple of days. Charles, I think you're going to need to register for the grad version, the planning or UPA version, because it'll be there. It's the same course. I mean, it's what's called co-listed, which really means it's just like this one, where it's all one course. But that way you get credit in planning or UPA or whatever, but also you get 3 credits. The law version is just 2 credits because we have different credits for different things. You guys all the grads classes are 3 credits apiece, so that's just kind of how it works. So did that get it? Everybody? Other questions?
This is going back to the pass-fail question. So for grad students in urban public affairs, if we would like to take it for a grade, do we need to let you know?
Nope.
Okay.
Now, it should. Unless something goes right, I'll have to contact the registrar's office. But when I enter the grades, I enter them for each section separately. So the law section will only show P and F as my options, but the grad section will how the university is doing it is I will enter a grade anyway, and then only if you have chosen to take it pass fail will the university then convert it to a P or an F.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, but I honestly, grad students, for this class, I don't see why you would take it pass fail unless you're just, unless life is really challenging for you at the moment. Because, and I know life is challenging for all of us, but I've seen no reason why all of you wouldn't be doing very well in the course at the end and want the benefit of the good grade. But obviously, and I don't know what they said was the date you had to choose, but obviously, I think it will be after you're done here. If you're having some sort of, illness or family crisis, and you're just not going to be able to finish it up, then that's one thing. But even with that, you're going to get a team grade for the hearing itself, as long as you make some reasonable effort to turn in something of a reflection paper, again, your grade should be really good. So, even if it's not an A, it'd be, A minus or something. I wouldn't see any reason not to stick with the grade if you're a grad student. And like I mentioned this, I think earlier, but for law students, if you earn an A in the class, I will write you a letter that says that. So you'll need to request it because, I mean, obviously, if some people don't need it or don't care, there's no point in spending the time generating letters that don't actually ever get used. But if you would like one, just message, you'll email me after the class is over. Don't email me now because this is too soon, but email me after the class is over and give me about a week to do it. But I will put a letter together for you. More questions? Oh, come on. Somebody surely has something. Okay. All right. So in that case, I mean, you can, email me your questions, or you can ask me when we break into groups or whatever. Okay. So now, the last thing I want to do for all of us together, is just to focus you on the fact that the last hearing is, U.S. Farmers Biofuel is seeking to use a currently unused industrial site to convert it into a biofuel production facility. And it's in West Louisville, and on the Ohio River, in some proximity to residential neighborhood, and raises all kinds of issues related to environmental injustice, issues of race and class, discrimination. And as you know, as we've talked about before, West Louisville has quite a bit of industrial land use, has quite a bit of land use that produces various kinds of pollutants, and this is an issue. And yet, when we talk about appropriate land uses and compatible land uses and so forth, when you have a concentration of industrial land uses, there is sort of a presumption that that's an appropriate place for industrial use. I mean, that it's pretty much that this particular area tends to be industrial in character, and so that raises a lot of interesting issues. The application is for a conditional use permit because the underlying zoning allows for industrial use. But if hazardous chemicals are going to be used or stored on the site, that's what triggers the conditional use permit requirement. And so, and then there are standards, and as I was trying to kind of allude to earlier, there are specific standards. There are standards that relate more generally to conditional use permits that are in the Louisville Metro Land Development Code, and then there are standards that relate. So standards relating to conditional use permits generally that have to be met, and then standards that are more specific to this kind of conditional use permit having to do with the hazardous facilities and so forth. Anyway, so that's the gist of it. But just to reiterate, the property is zoned EZ, which is enterprise zone, and industrial land uses are allowed in the industrial use. So that particular use is not conditional. It's the fact that the industrial use will involve the storage and use of hazardous chemicals that makes it conditional. Questions? Okay, well, why don't y'all break into your groups then, and I'm going to come around to each group after a bit. I'm going to let you sort of talk among yourselves, figure out roles and that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to check in as long as I can and answer questions. If you choose to move out of Blackboard Collaborate and instead go to Teams, somehow send me an email, let me know, or send me a message in Teams, and I will try to come find you. I'm going to stop the recording of this, and I'm going to put myself in this session on away, and then come find you in your groups or Teams, depending on how you do it. Okay? Anything else?
Sam?
Here. Yes?
Oh, no, it sounds good.
Okay, awesome. See you guys soon.